Hey everyone, how we all doing? Now, I've just been finishing some maintenance in our upstairs fish room. Everything is doing really well. But after we made this video, which is our rare catfish tank, we had a lot of people in the comments explaining that they had had similar issues with the infection that I discussed in it. Essentially, if you haven't watched it, go and watch it. It's quite a cool video. But we bought some new fish, we quarantined them as I always do, and they got a bad infection and ended up just being a bit of a nightmare. Now, those fish are good. The majority of them came through. But loads of the comments wanted to know how I keep my fish healthy, what I do, what I'm looking for. Well, as much information as I could give across. So I thought we would do this video where I will tell you what I'm looking for, what I do, what I treat with, what I feed, all of those things that keep the fish looking the way they do. It's taken me 20 years to get to this point. No, it hasn't really. I've spent 20 years in the industry, keeping fish, running fish shops, and this is all the information. So here we go. Let's keep all of your fish healthy in as quick a video as I can, but probably won't be that quick. Now, one thing to remember when keeping fish is there are many different ways of doing it. You will have everyone from aquarium shop staff to home fish keepers to, well, YouTubers all arguing that their way is the best way or this way is the best way to do it. I am going to be doing maintenance while we do this video, by the way. What was I saying? Oh yeah, they will argue that this way is the best or that way is the best, and that is absolutely fine. And to a point, they are probably right. There are many ways of keeping fish, and that is the way that they have been successful, and that is absolutely fine. But there are way too many variables for there just to be one way of keeping fish, or even two. There are hundreds of ways that you can succeed at this. You've just got to absorb all the information and make your own path. And that's why I try and give you as many different eventualities in these videos as possible, because, well, that makes sense to me. It's a way better way of teaching you all. Now, I just wanted to check that this filter was still running fairly well, which it is, so that is ideal. And that is one of the things we'll cover in a minute, is filtration. But actually first, let's start with my first favourite job, because I've finished the maintenance up here, and that is feeding, which is, I think, everyone's favourite job when it comes to fish. Now, even though on the outside most fish feeds look very similar, whether you're feeding, you know, a granular food or a pellet food or a flake food, whatever, they all look very samey. You know, some will have different things and colours put into them, but ultimately they all look the same until you break them down and have a look at it. Now, I have always been one for not going into super detail, because it just confuses people and people switch off and it really doesn't help anyone. But the quality of your food is paramount to keeping the water clean in your aquarium, stopping things like biofilms and algae growing, and obviously helps with the health of your fish. The old saying, and I didn't want to say it because it's a little bit cliche, but the old saying of "you are what you eat" is exactly the same for the fish. And if you give them the wrong diet, well, they just don't do as well. One thing that happens in the hobby quite a lot is your food breaking down too quickly. Now, yes, it does need to be able to be sort of digestible, and it does need to break down for the fish to be able to eat it. But if it's breaking down too quickly, you'll find that that food is releasing all the nutrients into the water and not actually into your fish once they have eaten it. So this food that I'm using here is actually the fish treat tablets from NT Labs, and these are really good because they stay solid for quite some time and allow all the fish to come up and graze off of them, nipping bits off, and bits will float into the water for smaller fish and catfish to graze upon. They're just really easy foods to feed, and now that I've scared all the fish away, they've run away, but it does make feeding them easy. Now, I know that these tablets will stay solid for absolutely ages, but if you are using a food, and I have used other tablets before, and they just turn to mush within 5 minutes of them going into the water, and you end up with this like pile of goo at the bottom of your aquarium. It's no good for anyone, because as soon as that has started breaking down, as I say, it's releasing nutrients into the water. It is feeding your water nutrients rather than your fish. Once the fish have got it in their mouths and then into their bellies, then they can start using up those nutrients. On the flip side, if your food is poor quality and has no nutrients in it, the fish will absolutely go for it, or they might not if it doesn't taste nice to them or doesn't smell enticing to them. But if they do go for it, it's just like, well, I guess eating polystyrene, as gross as that sounds. sort of, it doesn't do anything for you. It just fills you up full of something. It's just not there. You'll feel like you're full, you won't eat anymore, your fish might look fat, but actually their colour, their health, maybe them breeding, it's all going to have an impact from feeding them poor quality food or food that has already released all its nutrients into the water. Now, one other reason that I will normally stick to granular foods and pellet foods in the majority of situations is because you can actually target feed. When you chuck a handful of flake into an aquarium and it goes round like a giant snow globe, you're not really targeting your fish. Whereas with pellets, you can take them, you can actually target feed, you know, things like betters, bigger cichlids, all that sort of stuff, and actually make sure that they're eating the food that you're putting in there. With this tank here, it's obviously catfish that are going to hide away a lot. They are not the most confident things, and that is why there's now 3 cherry shrimp living in here to give me a bit of a hand with cleaning up the mess. But they will come out. I can keep an eye on that food in the front. It's not swirling around. It's not ending up in my filter. It's the perfect way of feeding because you can actually keep an eye on it. And I think that's where a lot of people's algae troubles come from, is actually feeding and then a lot of it ending up in the filter or a lot of it being lodged in behind rocks and wood. It just ends up polluting the tank and causing algae to grow. Whereas if you do little and often, small amounts of pellet food every now and again, you will be way more successful with keeping your tanks clean. Now, as I always explain on my channel, there we go, I know I put them somewhere, variety is, I don't want to say the spice of life. We're getting into all of the sayings tonight on this video, aren't we? I don't want to say variety is the spice of life, but variety is the key to successful tanks. There are so many different fish with so many different thoughts and tastes. Not that it's thoughts and tastes, but you get what I mean. If you're feeding a variety of food, you are more likely to have success in feeding all your fish. I've got some fish down in quarantine now, and where they've come from, they won't touch anything that isn't like microscopic, whereas things like microcrumb comes in, because that is a tiny little food that is almost like dust. So those small fish that I've got that we might be able to see, because by the time I finish this video the lights should be on still downstairs, they take that. But if I was feeding them all like a bigger pellet food that maybe doesn't sink and floats, or maybe a catfish pellet that sinks through the water and hits the deck really quickly, they wouldn't be taking it. So having 3 or 4 different styles or different types of food, whether it's really tiny granular food, whether it's almost dust, whether it's pellets, whether it's stick-on tablets, the more variety you can get into your tank, the more successful you are going to be. But you still need to be careful with how much you're feeding. And then one other thing that I like to do with all of my tanks is a little bit of frozen food. Maybe once a week, maybe twice a week. It really does depend on the type of fish. Things like the catfish that are in here actually do better with more sort of frozen foods, defrosted frozen foods that is, because they're just going to take it more than dried foods. Things like your wild caught fish, things that might be a bit more predatory, are going to do way better with frozen foods. And eventually, if you can get them onto pellet, that's the best option, because the pellets are designed to meet the nutritional needs, as long as you're buying the right pellets, of those fish. So I would always try and get a fish onto pellet or onto tablet as soon as possible. It's not always possible, but I would say it is a good thing to do. But once or twice a week, I will give these guys and girls up here a bit of a frozen feed, especially with my saltwater aquarium downstairs. Actually, we won't be able to do that in a minute when we go down. Is I feed them things like frozen brine shrimp, frozen rotifers, and it's all about designing the size of food that you are feeding to the size of the mouths of the fish. We sort of look at food, I think, a lot of the time and look at it and go, well, that's, you know, about the size of their mouth. Well, actually, when you shrink yourself down to the size of some of these fish, their eyes are tiny, their mouths are tiny. The food that they're seeing in front of them, even if it looks like dust to us, is probably the right size for them. You know, we're not eating a burger that's the same size as my mouth in one mouthful. We are eating little bites. And it's the same with a lot of these, and I think we forget that sometimes. You know, you feed a pellet that is one and gone, but actually some of this dust and some of this microscopic food that's dropping off this tablet is what they're going for more. Now, obviously, I do believe that feeding is a major part of fish keeping and keeping your fish healthy, because, well, it does make a difference when you're feeding good quality foods. I've been in this hobby for far too long and tested too many foods, and try different things in the shop and you can see the difference in health, in colour, in quality. I promise you, you just can. I think one of my old bosses used to say to me, you never see an unhealthy fat fish. Yes, that is true. Can fish get obese? Some fish certainly can. I've seen it in goldfish quite a lot in ponds. Again, when feeding poor quality food and they just bulk up. Anyway, that's by the point. If you're feeding your fish regularly, doing regular water changes, which we'll talk about in a minute, the fish stay healthy. One thing I'd say is overfeeding is your enemy though. So it is all about little and often. I would stress that to every person out there, especially if you're a beginner. Little bits every so often is way better than leaving it 3 days and going bang, handful of food, because your waste levels are just going to go through the roof. They're then going to clean themselves. The fish are going to all go to the toilet at a similar time, and then we're going to get this big influx of pollutants in the aquarium. So I would say, especially here, this is what I do, is a little bit in the morning, a little bit in the afternoon, and I mean tiny amounts to keep the fish grazing or allow them to graze almost all day. But you do have to be careful with overfeeding. That's why I'm going to stress. Now, talking of overfeeding, I'm going to go and have my dinner quickly, and then we will continue this video downstairs in the fish garage, where we can talk about water changing, filter cleaning, and some really important things. So I'll bring you all back in a minute. Oh, actually, I just remembered something. Now, this whole channel is about education and replying to your comments and talking to you in the comments and making sure your questions are answered. And actually, quite a few of the questions that I completely forgot about until I went to leave was, I've read loads of different rules of thumb. This was the one I can remember. I've read loads of different rules of thumb about how much you should be feeding and how often and what time. So I think it's important that we sort of discuss this. Now, every single pot of food out there will tell you to feed something different in some sort of way. Now, I have seen it on certain pots of food saying things like feed 5 times, feed 10 times a day, as much as your fish will eat in 2 to 5 minutes. Oh my word, if that was the case and you went and done that, this pot of food would last about a week. It would last about a day in my house. So you do not need to do that much. I actually haven't read the instructions on here for quite some time. Feed twice daily, only the amount your fish will consume within a few minutes, which is perfect. You don't want food to be sitting on the bottom. You want all that food to have gone within a few minutes. You do not want it sitting. Companies that are out there telling you to feed 5-6 times a day, as much as they can feed in 5-10 minutes, have only one thing in mind, and that thing in mind is for you to use up your food quicker and possibly then to cause algae and, you know, buy another one of their products. I don't know. But you do want to keep it low. Keep the feeding little and often, what they can feed within, you know, a minute or so. And what I would say to that is, that's not pick up a pinch, chuck it in, hope for the best. That is sprinkle in a tiny little bit, maybe 5 or 6 pellets, see if the fish take it all. If the fish take all that, go again. It's not about like pouring half the pot in and go, oh, they haven't eaten that within 2 minutes. Oh, well. It is that whole little sprinkle, stand back, little sprinkle, stand back. A little bit different with the stick-on tablets, but I will come back to that in probably 5 or 10 minutes, check that it's all gone. But while I'm stood here, the catfish aren't coming out, and once they come out, that tablet will probably be gone. So, yeah, that's a bit about feeding. Let's go downstairs. I'm going to eat my dinner, and then I'll bring you back in the fish garage. Take 2. So dinner took a little bit longer than I anticipated, and it's quite late in the fish room, so some of the tanks will have started turning off. Sorry, fish garage, not fish room. Now, the next most important step, or not the next most, but another step that we take to keep all the fish as tip-top healthy as we can, is maintenance, water changes, and keeping that water fresh, because it has such huge benefits to the aquarium, and some that are actually unseen and, well, actually undiscussed in the hobby most of the time. Now, as a rough rule, most of the aquariums in the fish garage and upstairs in the fish room will get a rough 25 to 30% water change a week. But again, why I say there is no hard and fast rule for fish keeping is that tanks with singular betters like this one and fast growing plants in there that are going to be using up the nutrients, well, you don't necessarily need to water change as much. The same with shrimp aquariums. You know, if you've got a fair few shrimp but you've got loads of fast growing plants, the water changes aren't necessary for keeping that water clean. But there is a reason that I would say they are worthwhile sometimes. But tanks with big cichlids in, with goldfish in, with anything that is a little bit chunkier and is going to produce more waste, then those I would say are, well, vital that you're getting those water changes done, especially with goldfish and cichlids if they're going to be eating all of your fast growing plants. Now, I did promise you a look at a couple of new fish, and two of them are living in here. We've got a lovely violet better in here that isn't out at the moment, and this thing which I have aptly named my clown better because he is absolute crazy colours. Now, when doing water changes, I will often try and make sure that I'm using a gravel cleaner. So you'll find one of those sort of clear tubes with the siphon tube coming off of it, and you can go through and pick up any waste that might be hidden in amongst the sand, in amongst the gravel, and remove it from the aquarium. Once that starts breaking down, then you may end up causing algae through all that excess waste, maybe excess food if you've overfed, but gravel cleaning is going to help that out. If I think that there's loads of waste trapped in places that I can't get to, in behind wood, in behind rock, I'll get out a turkey baster. Now, this is a special aquarium feeding turkey baster, which is a little bit smaller. I do have a bigger one that I normally use to jet water in amongst rocks and wood and just flush out any waste, because even though it's trapped in there, if you can flush it out and then eventually siphon it out, or your filter can pick it up, then eventually your tank will be cleaner. And then every time I do a water change, I make sure to use a decent dechlorinator. Now, this is Optimus and Satus, which you'll have seen me use hundreds and hundreds of times. For the pennies that dechlorinator costs to dose, well, smaller aquariums and maybe not bigger ones, but it's still not expensive. It is a cheap safety net. You may find that you don't have chlorines, you may not have chloramines in your area. I speak to loads of people globally and some people won't need to use it. But again, it's just a safety net. Like Optimus actually can help with ammonia as well. So if you ever get a spike, again, it's giving you another safety net, but a different one. And then Satus is a good bacteria that breaks down waste in the aquarium. It just, again, gives you that safety net. If you're cleaning out your filter and you're disturbing your filter bacteria, well, then putting good bacteria back in there just to help everything sort of catch up with itself is worthwhile. It's sort of just keeping everything ticking along. Maybe like topping up your oil in your car and topping up your screen wash. It's just good practice to do it every time. But yeah, that's what I would make sure I do every time I water change. But clean, conditioned water is pretty much the basis of this hobby. Now, you are getting a sneak peek at this aquarium, and this is a blackwater aquarium, which sort of breaks, not some of the rules, but definitely changes a few things that I've spoken about in this video, but I'm not getting into that in this one. You'll need to go and watch this video when it's out. I don't even know when I'm filming this or when this will be out, but this one that you're watching now will be out before this one, so keep an eye on that. Actually, subscribe and then hit the bell icon and you'll get alerted when I release this video. But you'll find that old fish keepers, not even old fish keepers actually, I suppose I'm an old fish keeper now, but fish keepers used to say, and still probably do, I'm just not in touch with them anymore, is that you're looking after the water rather than looking after the fish. And for most of it, that is actually true. You are looking after the water quality rather than the fish, because if you get that right, well, the fish are going to be happy in their environment, and you just need to worry about, well, feeding them pretty much. A lack of maintenance can bring on something called old tank syndrome and a few other things that sort of don't have real common names in the hobby, but that is where you have sort of left the tank for months and months and months. The plants are growing absolutely fine, the tank is looking fairly good, you're sort of easing off on the maintenance, as it were, because everything looks good, and why would I be trying to fix something that isn't broken? But actually doing that little and often maintenance is what is keeping your tank clean. And it may be 6 months, it may be a year, it could be any length of time, because again, in this hobby, there are so many variables. And if you're breaking down your tank every so often, you may never get to that point where, you know, your nitrates have built up so much, or your phosphates have built up so much, and algae starts to grow. You may never get to that point, but a lot of us want to keep tanks for a longer period than that, and it is definitely something that can creep up on you. Nitrates can slowly creep up, and most of the time, back in the days of when I was working in the shop, it would actually be when someone added new fish, because the 100 or so fish, well, maybe not 100, but all the fish that you've got in the aquarium are used to that dirty water, as it were. This isn't dirty before you get onto it. This is meant to look brown and like that. So they would get used to that dirty water. Maybe nitrates are high, maybe phosphates are high. Then you go to a fish shop and you add fish from a fish shop where water changes are done daily or every other day, and the water is kept fresh, because with that many fish in a fish shop, that's what you need to do. The nitrates might be near zero, the phosphates might be near zero, and you put them into your tank and then all hell breaks loose, because they're not ready for that level of, for want of a better word, pollution, really, if I'm honest. So it is something that you need to watch out for, and most of the time, or some of the time, people would blame the shop. I haven't had a problem in my tank for years, and then I went and added some new fish, and they all got sick. Sometimes it's worth looking at your own tank, and I can be part of this as well. Sometimes it's worth looking at your tank and going, I wonder why that happened. Rather than blaming the shop, have a look at yourself first. And I certainly did it when I had my troubles with my cardinal tetras in my quarantine tank. I looked at myself first. I tested the water, I checked everything, made sure all the filters were running. Yeah, it is something that can happen. If you change your tank every so often, you may never get there. But old tank syndrome is a thing, and maybe it needs its own video at some point. As I have said, there is no one right way to keep aquariums, and you have to work out what you want to keep and how you want to keep it, and if it's going to work. You know, blackwater aquariums are a prime example of not gravel vacking that often, if at all. Fully planted aquariums with soil in the front and a carpet of plants. Again, you might want to sort of scoot over the plants and suck any waste out of it, but it is worth working out what your tank is and what you need to do to it. Wildstad methods or no filter tanks, you know, you have to look at the fish you are keeping in there, that they are going to thrive in that environment. It's no good putting a high oxygen mountain dwelling fish that needs that flow of fresh water in a tank with no flow and loads of plants and probably fluctuating levels of oxygen. But something like a Baster or a gourami that thrives in those low oxygen environments, probably going to get on quite well. It is just working out what your tank will work with and how it will work. And then one thing I think is really, really important to go over is the fact that when you are water changing, it's not just the nutrients you are removing. It is minerals, it is elements, it is things you are putting back into the water. And your fish are using them as a, not food source, but as a mineral to grow, to build their bodies. Yes, they're getting it from their food, but if you left a tank and let them use up all those minerals and elements, your fish aren't going to be as good. I can promise you that. It's why a lot of fish farms do lots and lots of water changes to bring fresh water in through. They can feed more, the fish are bigger, the fish will be using up those minerals out of the water. We used to have a customer, loved them to bits, Mr. and Mrs. Matthews, elderly couple that kept Malawi cichlids. You could sell them a pair of cichlids on a Monday, and by the Monday next week when they came back in, they would have babies. And then probably in about 6 weeks' time, they would be bringing you back fish that are almost the same size as what you sold them. And I could not wrap my head around how they were doing it. But Mrs. Matthews used to be in charge of the water changes, and she would go through and go and water change every tank, like a lot. I mean, like over what I would do, 50, 60, 70% every week. They were in a hard water area. The Malawis absolutely loved that fresh, clean water going in. They were able to feed more. The nutrients and the water quality was always tip top, and they grew like stink. It's not for everyone. It may not work for some people, depending on your tap water, but it is definitely worth thinking about. Now, whilst talking about cleanliness and your maintenance maintenance regime, and also water changes, the filter is well worth discussing. A clean, healthy filter is going to have way more space for bacteria, way more space to break down that waste and keep your aquarium clean. Once it starts clogging up with all that waste and all that muck and plant debris and fish poo, the surface area starts getting clogged, there's not as much space for bacteria. You know, once a foam is at full capacity and full of waste, it can't catch anymore. Water will start bypassing around the outside and your aquarium won't be as clean. Way back on the channel, we done a test where we sort of left the tank for a little bit. All the water parameters tested up absolutely fine, but the mold that we were getting building up on the bottom of the aquarium was horrendous, and that was because the filter was full of waste. Yes, these filters might still pump water around in 6 months' time without cleaning them, but it is something to think about, that actually that is a place for things to harbour, and parasites and nasty bacteria and also good bacteria. But keeping a clean filter is really key to the, well, just health of your aquarium. Now, when cleaning out my filtration systems, I will generally do it in old aquarium water. The reason for this as well is I just like to teach the safest methods to all of you. Yes, Barry from Wigan, that's going to be down in the comment section, and there is no Barry from Wigan, this is completely made up. Yes, you have been water changing your filters in tap water for the last 30 years. I get it. But the problem is, if Rebecca down the road has just started keeping fish and she's got not that much bacterial space, like she hasn't got real wood, she hasn't got real plants yet, she's got a fish tank that is sort of not mature, and you pop up on the Facebook page and start telling them to, oh, I've cleaned my filters in tap water for the last 30 years, it's absolutely fine. Well, that might crash her entire system. And I've seen it happen time and time again, where just because it works for you and you preach it aggressively, you know, passionately, let's say, online, doesn't mean it's going to work for everyone else. I talk to a global audience here. That's why I say, do you know what? Wash them in old tank water. It's safer than washing them in tap water. The chlorines, the chloramines aren't present. If they are even present, you won't kill off all of your bacteria. Who knows? Like, who knows what is the best, perfect possible answer? But personally, teach the beginners the safest option and they can succeed, and then they can move on, make their own minds up, watch 100 other channels, see what is working for them and go from there. But I do not want people to fail in the first 6 months, because then pretty much we lose them as a fish keeper forever. And then they go and tell 10 of their friends, don't keep fish, they're a pain, they're awful. And then those 10 people have this really skewed view of aquarium keeping. And it's not that, it's easy. You've just got to take it slow and just be methodical and, yeah, not listen to Barry from Wigan. Sorry if you are Barry from Wigan, I don't mean it. It's just that was the first name that came into my head for some strange reason. Now, depending on where we are to in the maturity cycle of an aquarium, I'll be testing the water fairly regularly. Something like this, which is the Aquarium Lab, tests for everything that you need when you're looking at aquariums. So pH, ammonia, nitrite, nitrate, and then the hardnesses. Obviously, pH is your acidity, alkalinity level, so sort of tells you whether your water's more Rift Lake or more Amazonian soft water, I guess. Also, the hardnesses play into that, because you'll find different fish prefer different hardnesses. So you may want to test your tap water first, or find out what your local tap water is before deciding on what fish you are going to be going for. Your ammonia, your nitrite and your nitrate are all the waste levels. Fish waste, wee and poo, is ammonia. It gets broken down into nitrite and then it gets broken down into nitrate. Actually, regular testing is where you can start seeing old tank syndrome happening, because your nitrate might be at 10 1 week, and then you test it again in 2 weeks' time and it's at 20. Even though you've done your water changes and you've got fast growing plants, those nitrates are still creeping up, and then 4 weeks' time it's at 40, and you're like, oh my word, I need to do either more water changes, slow down on feeding, or get some faster growing plants in there that are going to use that nitrate up, or a culmination of all three. But you can spot old tank syndrome coming if you are regularly checking your water. And it also helps with shops. If you are going to your shop for help and you have a regular, what am I trying to say? A regular log, that's the word I was trying to say, of all of your test results, you'll find that you can go to them, oh yeah, my pH has been 6.8 for the last 6 months. Absolutely fine, no problems at all. Or you can go to them and like, oh, 3 weeks ago it was 7.5 and now it's 7.2 and then next week it's 6.8, and you can see those progressions and those changes before they become a problem. But once a tank gets mature a bit like this one, I will slow down on testing the water. Right at the start, I'd be checking this one every 2 or 3 days, maybe even sooner. But to be fair, you might not be making a video about it, so you might not need to do it as often as I do. But certainly every week, or maybe before you're going to get fish, or a couple days before you're getting the fish, so you can react if there's a problem, is key to success. It's also worth having, because if you get home from work at 6 o'clock at night or whatever time and the fish shops are shut and your fish are gasping, they're sluggish, they're flicking, they're who knows what, if you can't see any external signs on the fish, which we're going to go through in a second, you will have to test your water. And checking it and testing it is one of the first things I would do. Visual check over, test the water. Generally, if anything's off, followed up by a water change, because there's obviously something in that tank that is affecting the fish, if it be a nutrient, if it be the pH swing, who knows. But testing is the first key in getting it right. Now for this next little segment, I'm just going to sit here and pull up my soft comfy chair, because I love sitting in front of this tank. Now I'm going to talk about algae, and you might think that's a bit weird for this video because you're like, well, you're talking about fish health, but algae is a key indicator when it comes to actually the quality of your water. If you have got slime algae growing everywhere, if you've got hair algae, if you've got blackbeard growing on things, not the pirate, algae, blackbeard algae, I always think of that when I go through my head, it can be a sign of a bad issue, like a nutrient problem or a lack of water change. It could also be a sign that your lights are on for too long in the day. It could be a sign that you're using poor quality food and it's just not being processed by the fish, or they're not eating it, or even you're feeding too much. There are loads of different things that can cause excess algae, and that can then cause nutrient issues, which then can cause issues for your fish. So algae is a good thing to keep an eye on to make sure it's not getting out of control. Now you can see the green algae that's growing on the rocks here. I've got no issues with that. That is literally my lighting and my maintenance levels that is meaning that algae is growing on that rock. So I've got no hair algae, really, I don't think, nope, on the wood anywhere. It is just those rocks, and they were very white rocks when they went in, and I'm running very bright lighting. But I have never seen algae eaters as healthy as the ones in here. Some of my Otocinclus in here have the biggest little bellies. So I've taken the decision that actually, as long as this algae doesn't spread anywhere and it's just growing on my pebbles, I quite like it. It looks like a proper little riverbed. And I don't mind it, so I'm going to keep it. But it is an indicator for issues going on in the aquarium. As long as you're on top of those issues and you're thinking about what is causing that problem, then you're fine. If you just leave it, and 6 weeks down the road, you're like, yeah, I've had algae growing and I don't know why, and all of a sudden all my fish have started disappearing, then you should have seen the signs earlier. So that's why I wanted to mention algae. Sometimes it's not an issue like this tank, and it is just natural. Algae lives in every body of water in every aquarium, but sometimes it is worth paying attention to, because it could be the first signs of something going wrong, which could end up causing a problem with your fish. Now I thought I'd just bring you back out to the fish garage to show you one of my quarantine tanks, and actually down here is another 2 quarantine tanks that I run. You probably don't need to go this aggressive when you're keeping fish at home, but having a quarantine tank is actually really quite useful just in case anything does go wrong. But the main thing for actually stopping illness and realising you've got illnesses in your aquarium is by observation. Is your fish swimming right? Is it skulking at the back? Is it hiding away? Is it flicking off of the gravel? There are so many signs that can sort of show that your fish are uncomfortable. Now sometimes this can be down to bullying, it could be down to fish chasing each other, there's lots of different reasons, but sometimes it can be down to a bacterial infection or a parasitic infection, and watching your fish and looking for spots or looking for white patches is key in success and keeping your fish healthy for longer. I would show you this tank a little bit more, but I don't want to stress the fish out. This is my quarantine tank. This is where the fish go in when they first come in, so I don't want to hammer all the lights on to be bright now just for the sake of filming this. So this is my quarantine tank. You can see it in the rare pleco video when we had the problem with the cardinals that are Yeah, they're there. You can not really see them. But let's go sit in front of a nicer tank to show you what I mean by observing your fish. Now, I thought I'd bring you back in front of my Highline aquarium because this is one of the best tanks to use these fish treat tablets in, just because the fish go mad for them. I do have to clear everything off the lid. That's the only problem with me. I do like storing things on the tops of my fish tanks. But as I say, observing the tank is key to keeping everything healthy and happy. Once you get to know your fish and once you get to know their characteristics and their traits and everything like that, actually seeing if they've got a sickness becomes way easier. Now, spending as long as I have, which is the best part of 20 years working in the aquarium hobby, to be honest, you spot things very quickly. I can walk around shops and start noticing that the swimming pattern of those rummy noses isn't quite right, or, I don't know, those plecos aren't sitting quite normally and it looks a bit strange. And you pick it up just by observing the fish for a long time. And it doesn't even need to be coloration. Sometimes it is that all the fish are up in the top corner. Actually, in this tank here, 2 of my keyholes disappeared for like 3 days, and I'd seen them hollowing out some bits and pieces down here and moving some sand around, and I'd observed that over several days, and I'm like, they're breeding, they're going to lay eggs, they're going to bring babies out of a cave. And lo and behold, 2 or 3 days later, there they were, ushering a little group of babies around the tank. And obviously didn't last long in here, first time parents and all that, they didn't get on with it. But it is one of those things that I knew those 2 were missing, and I started looking for them just to make sure I was positive what they were going to be doing. Now, if a certain fish starts acting odd, so maybe 1 or 2 of the keyholes start hiding away in the corner, they could be breeding, they could be being chased by the other fish. If one fish is disappearing, maybe that is getting chased around or bullied by other fish. If all your fish are acting odd, there's probably something going on in the aquarium, and then it's where you would start testing your water and checking with things like that. But you are looking for things like fluffiness around the face or around the fins if they've got a fungal infection. You're looking for frayed fins, so if their fins start looking a little bit like tassely, I guess, you would find that, yeah, that is maybe bullying, or is that maybe the start of fin rot. If you've got white spots coming on them, so like someone sprinkled sugar over them, well, that might be white spot, and that might be the start of a parasite infection. So all these little things that you can look up and sort of try and find out. Actually, NT Labs have a really cool like infographic over on their website, which shows you like sort of, not animations, that's the wrong word, but shows you all the different illnesses and sicknesses, and if it looks like this or if it looks like that, and then what to treat it with. So I'll link that down in the description, because that little poster used to live in the shop, and it was like, well, the customers go to, because you could show the customer, like, does it look like this? Does it look like this? And it really helped us out. So I'll link that down in the description, because you can go and download that if you want to. So if you see any of those sicknesses, that fluffiness, the frayed fins, the white spots, the funguses, I think I already said fluffiness. Anyway, if you see any of those illnesses, you are probably going to have to treat with like an aquarium treatment. I go back to my water testing and my water changing. There is no point in treating a fish if the water quality is bad. If you've got high ammonia, if you've got high nitrite, the fish are probably sick because of that. They are probably stressed out because they're living in a pollutant. So you really want to fix that first before getting any medication in there, because to get rid of the ammonia, you're going to want to do water changes and maybe use something like Optimus to make it safer. But then to obviously treat it, you're going to be putting the treatment in there, and then you're going to be water changing it out, and so on and so on. So yeah, get your water fixed first and then start to treat. Actually, I've got the treatment on the shelf in the garage. That's why I put those shelves up, was to be able to display it and do educational videos like this. So let's go back into the garage and I can show you some of my favourite fish treatments, if that's a thing. That sounds proper weird. Now, there obviously are loads and loads of different medications out there. To be honest, we used to use NT Labs in the shop back when I was working in there, and we were buying it in by like the bottle, and we were using it for all our fish shipments and everything like that. It's just a brand I have known and worked with for years, so I've just stuck with it in my home aquariums. And now that I've got like, I don't know, 30 home aquariums, it just makes my life easy. That I'm going to leave up there. That is an anti-fluke and wormer, which you normally use for discus tanks. It's a really good treatment, but hopefully it's not one of the more commonly used ones that well, yeah, you shouldn't get flukes and worms, hopefully, if shops are doing their jobs right, but every now and again you do. These ones are probably my main ones that I really like, so let's show you them first. Now, as I say, there are loads of different medications, and you may need to pick up different ones for what you are suffering with or what your fish are suffering with. But I used to get asked a lot in the shop of which one would you choose as a fail-safe to have in your cupboard just in case. And I'd probably say the two most common were these two. Disease Solve is like an all-rounder. I was going to say it's like paracetamol, but it's not. It's a medication. It does treat and solve the fish. It's acroflavin and methylene blue. You can look up all of the different ingredients on the sides of these bottles, because some of them actually have similar ingredients. Like, I'd probably expect, yeah, the anti-ulcer and fin rot one actually has acroflavin in as well, in different levels, but they do all have similar medications in them. But that would be the one that is like an all-rounder. So if it's late at night, you're suffering with issues, you've tested your water, everything's good, Disease Solve is a really good one. But I'd say these are probably the three most popular ones if you're looking for individual treatments that I would keep on the shelf. Anti-white spot and fungus being probably the most popular, because white spot is one of the things that I would say a lot of people suffer with, and then alongside that the funguses, if the fish ever nicks themselves and gets an infection, that is really good. But I'd say if you can, keep a couple of the common ones, probably these two, in stock at all times. Watch out, because they do go out of date. It takes them a while, but they do go out of date. But the more medications you've got at home, if you've got a fish house like me with like 30 odd tanks, it just makes sense for me to keep them all in here. And that infographic that I was talking about, I've actually just realised is all on the backs of the boxes. I think I've got a couple of different generations of boxes here by the looks of things, because this one's got a slightly different picture to this one. But yeah, that's the sort of infographics I'm talking about. So you've got like bulging scales, sort of red fins, you've got frayed fins, and different sorts of things that you can, well, look out and spot on your fish. So yeah, well worth it. I wouldn't say keeping all medications in your house is necessary, but maybe a couple of the common ones would be ideal. But beyond everything I have discussed in this video, really it does come down to good habits and learning them and keeping in them. Little and often is always the thing that I say on this channel, and 25% water change a week, maybe a little feed in the morning, maybe a little feed in the evening, depending on the fish that you've got in there, is gonna keep the tank ticking along gently. If you leave your fish for 4 days and then bang a load of food in there, your waste levels are gonna spike, and then they're gonna come back down again, and it's just not gonna be good for them. The same with water changes. If you do a water change once a week, your water is gonna be going slightly dirty, cleaner, dirty, cleaner, dirty, cleaner, and your pH should do the same thing. It's not going to be constantly getting more acidic over time. It is just going to keep along on that level. If you left it for 6 weeks, 8 weeks with no water change, your tank and your pH is slowly going to be getting more acidic and more acidic over time. And even with fast growing plants, your nitrates and your phosphates are probably going to be rising a little bit alongside all the minerals being depleted in the aquarium. Then you come to do a water change, 6 weeks on, 8 weeks on, whatever it's going to be, and you think, oh, I haven't done one in a while, I'm going to do a big one. Well, the pH coming out of your tap and the nitrate level coming out of your tap is probably different, more than likely different. Yeah, it's different. And then you put 50% into your tank. Sensitive species are not going to like that. To be fair, even some common hardy species are probably not going to like that big change. It'd be like taking you from your house and dropping you onto Mount Everest within 20 minutes and then possibly back again. It would be a shock to most fish for that pH to go from maybe 6.5 to 7, and from that nitrate level to go from maybe 50 or 60 down to 10 in a matter of minutes. But as I have said throughout this video, there is no one way to keep fish. There never will be. There are too many variables, there are too many lakes, there are too many rivers, there are too many streams with all different situations and pHs and scenarios, that there will never be one right way of keeping fish. And people will find successes in not doing water changes or in doing lots of water changes. It is just the way this hobby is going to be. What I would say to you is having the base level that I have spoken about in this video is is key for a beginner's success. Doing that 25% water change, doing that little and often feed, knowing how the nitrogen cycle works and testing your water regularly. All these things are going to mean a beginner has success, and that is exactly the way and the reason why I teach it like I do. But drop it down in the comments as to what your thoughts and your processes are, and let's all help each other learn. Let's help each other find success in fish keeping, keep more people in it. As I say, one person's failure will tell 10 people, and then those 10 people will think fish keeping sucks, and that is not what I want, because it has so many mental health benefits and such a fun hobby. Oh, he's up there. I panicked for a minute there. But I will see you all in the next one. Hopefully you've enjoyed it. Remember to like, comment, subscribe. I'm not doing all that YouTube stuff. But as always, I will see you all in the next one.